I know. Hello, everybody. Thanks for staying. I appreciate that. Just for the last bit, it makes me feel a lot better. I was reading some of the stuff around here, and I noticed that next weekend, in this very place, they've got speakers from North Carolina over in America, and you can tell. Is that where you're from, love? Just America. Oh, that's right. How are things going over there? Sounds great on the news at the minute. Sounds tremendous. All I know is that the further away someone comes from, the better they are as a speaker. That's what I know. I'm from Rotherham. That's where I live. So I'll leave that with you. Listen, just to finish today, I want to just leave you with a question, really. Because it's a question I ask myself all the time in the various schools. I do a lot of schools work, 10 schools. I do assemblies every half term, and we do some remarkable work in the senior schools in Rotherham. But I have to say, sometimes I'm never quite sure what I've done. I mean, I know what I'm doing. I know the script. But just like in any form of Christian ministry, I think, what did I just do then? Did I just take up time? Did I actually have an impact? And I do remember vividly that there was, when I was doing assemblies in one school, there was one girl, amidst the 200 kids, she seemed to be the keenest. Couldn't sit on her bottom in the assembly. She'd be up on her knees, so eager to join the songs and to listen. And I remember seeing her, and I started praying for this girl, this particular girl. And then after I'd been a few times, I just, what's her name? And they told me her name, so I could pray for her by name. And then she came to one of our holiday clubs, and she was so keen. And my wife saw her, and she said, "Who's that girl?" So she started praying for her as well. And then she got older, and about 5 or 6 years later on, obviously I never saw her again, until one day I was in a traffic jam in Rawmarsh, in Rotherham. And this girl, she was walking up with her friend, considerably older, but I could tell it was her. And she crossed the road to the traffic island. And I thought, I wonder what's happened with all those prayers. So I wound the window down and I said, "Hello." And she said, "What?" So, "I'm Alistair." "So?" And her friend was looking and going, because embarrassed. I said, "Well, it's nice to see you." And I realized I didn't know what to say to her, really. I thought she'd remember me. I said, "I used to do assemblies at your school, do you remember?" She went, "God, no." I said, "Oh, bye." And she walked off, and her friend said to her, "Who was that?" She said, "No, some pedo." I debated whether to say that here. And I wound the window up, and I cried a little tear inside. And I wondered, what am I doing? What am I actually doing? What are you actually doing when you go in front of schools and you're a bit nervous, a bit more nervous than you admit? What are you doing when we try and reach small groups of people and half the number you expected turn up? What are you actually doing? I'll tell you what I think I'm doing. We amazingly got permission to go into one of the senior schools. And we decided what we'd do is we would interview people whose lives had been changed by what they believe. Because we discussed this with the RE team, and they felt that, well, RE was about what you believe, and they wanted to prove it was worth teaching RE. So let's show what RE does. It changes what people believe. So we went and found half a dozen people with some really amazing stories. A friend of mine who used to be a trawlerman, his trawler sank under him and he was winched off by a helicopter. As he watched it go under, he knew that God was calling him to a new life. That's a pretty dramatic story, isn't it? We got the attention of the teenagers at the senior school on that one. And then I had a Royal Marine commander who was shot and nearly lost both his legs, and lying there wounded, he said, "If you're there, God, please rescue me." And God did rescue him. He now runs a homeless charity. Another friend who spent his life in crime and in drugs and escaped from prison, banged on the door of his girlfriend. She said, "What are you doing here? I'm going to get into trouble." He says, "I'm sick of this. I'm sick of life." She said, "Well, come in here. I've just become a Christian." And changed his life. So we sat and we tell kids, what you believe will decide what you become. And then we brought Sue in. And Sue doesn't have a dramatic story. She was a toilet cleaner for a primary school in Rotherham. And so I would interview her, and I'd say, you must have found some interesting things in the toilets in the primary school in Rotherham. And it was amazing. I didn't know what the answer would be. She said, oh, all sorts. And she listed the things. Teeth. Teeth? I couldn't work that out. But apparently it's a common issue in primary schools. So we listened to all that. And then I began to interview her because I knew where her story was going. And in front of the whole of the school, she told the story of walking back from that little primary school. And we talked about how she had a little life with a little job, but how a little life can have a remarkably big impact. Because walking home, when she got home, the door wasn't opened by her husband. It was opened by a policeman who told her that her sister-in-law had been murdered the night before, and her niece. And I tell you, the room went quiet then. I mean, really quiet. What we say to all the kids in that room is that you can ask any question you like, and we will treat you with respect by allowing you to ask any question, and if we can, we will answer it. And at 12 and 13 years old, they've got a lot of questions. And Sue began to tell the story of what it's like as a Christian to be told that one of your closest family members died the night before at the hands of a murderer, the man she'd been married to. And I think we tell them in moments like that, we tell the kids that God is in the messiest parts of life and in the most real parts of life. That's what I'm doing. I'm not getting them to sing songs, although we use songs. What we're doing is saying that God is where the pain is. God is where the tragedy is. God is where real life is. When I go back to my schooling, I use very little of it in real life. Although I have a pretty average chemistry O-level, I have never heard the word potassium permanganate until a couple of days ago, and it turns up in everybody's sinks. Did you hear that somewhere? That is not useful. So much of what I was taught wasn't useful for day-to-day living, but God is. In fact, in my experience, God is essential for day-to-day living. So when we start talking about things like this, it isn't just distant, dusty stories, it's God in real life today. That's what I want to do when I'm talking to young people in our schools. Sue then went on and had never talked about this before publicly. So she began to describe in excruciating detail how your heart rate races, how your knees buckle when you hear this. She talked at length at the way the police spoke to her, and they were fantastic, I have to say. And then she spent a long time talking about the process of having to drive from her home to Sheffield to identify the body. I tell you, they listened to every word. Every word. And then, all of a sudden, when we came to the questions, one hand went up. And it was the first hand. And at the back, yes, because I interviewed Sue, you see. So I said, yes, what's the question? She said, it's not a question for you. Oh, great. She said, Sue, I don't think you have a small life. I think you're magnificent. And one of the things that Sue had been famous for wasn't cleaning the toilets. It's the fact that when she was in that school, people would come to school early to give her a hug. Because there was something about Sue's character that meant that not just the children wanted to hug her, but in a couple of cases, some of the staff came. Kids would come who hadn't had breakfast. Kids would come and she'd help to get them clean. And she was a good hugger, was Sue. And that girl said, Miss, I think you're magnificent. Can I give you a hug? And in front of the entire Year 8 of Rawmarsh Comprehensive School, she walked right down the steps in the drama hall. And Sue went, oh yes, love, come here. And Sue, I'd lost control of the entire meeting by this time, and Sue climbed down off the stage and gave the hug. And it was one of the most spiritual experiences I've ever had in my life. You see, I'll tell you what we're doing. We're showing people that God is in the dirtiest and the most dangerous parts of life. We're also giving kids a taste of the experience of a transcendent God, a holy God, who is not like anything else. And the tragedy is that so often our worship falls far short of the character of our God. But incredibly, when he is heard, when people are vulnerable, when people are honest, and when people are open, they get a taste of something that they've never tasted before. That's what we can be doing. And then 30 other kids lined up behind this girl to hug her. 30 of them. Because here's the last thing I think we do. When I go into schools, I want them to know that when their life is a mess, when they have an appetite for something better than this life, that they'll know where to go and get it. I'm under no illusions that the school's work we do, and we do a lot in Rotherham, does not put bottoms in our pews. But if it directs kids to where to go when they're in a mess, if they know and remember just one line from a silly song, if they have some taste and some sense and some experience that what they've been longing for somehow is that the right thing, then what you and I are doing every day is worth every single moment of that. Because I'll tell you one other thing as well. I used to fly a lot. And I was flying from Washington to Kansas. And I got bumped up to first class. It's the only time it's ever happened. And first class meant that there was a little curtain, because American Airlines, they're rubbish, aren't they? Yes, they closed the airlines, closed the curtain like that. And there was 4 in the front and 2. And out came the lady. And she says to the person in front of me, "Would you like steak or lobster, sir?" And he says, "Lobster." And she goes to the next guy, "Would you like steak or lobster?" "Lobster." And he goes to the next guy, "Steak or lobster?" He goes, "Oh, we're 5, 6, and it's me." She comes to me, she says, "Would you like steak, sir?" So I had my steak. And then a few minutes later on, this announcement came over, "We're being diverted. There's a blizzard coming in. We're going to have to divert. Please put your seatbelt on." So we put our seatbelts on. And the guy next to me, he said, "Excuse me, madam." He said, "Excuse me," he said, "is there any chance to go through the safety routine again?" Now, if you've flown much, the one thing you know is the safety routine, isn't it? But isn't it true that you and I, we don't listen to it at all? In fact, if I'm absolutely honest, I make sure I don't listen to it just to prove that I'm an experienced flyer. But when you're facing a blizzard and the plane's going up and down like that, all of a sudden, the safety announcement becomes the most important thing on the entire flight. I want every child in Rawmarsh to know where to go in an emergency. I want them to know it. I want them to feel it. And I want it to be an instinctive reaction. So that prayer isn't a weird thing. It's something that we did at school. And I would love it to carry on for the next 5, 20 years. I'd love them to sign up for our churches. But the business we're in is not getting these children into church. It's getting them into heaven. So that for eternity, they will know what we've been talking about. Forever, they will have a sense of this remarkable God who can heal, who can change, who can bring life from death. And that's what we're doing. That's what we must do. And I tell you, I love doing it. Amen.